Thank you very much, Mitch, and thank you very much for the organizers to entertain you in this morning just after breakfast. I'm going to talk about icky things. Well, I'm going to talk about these kind of guys. At least when I talk about bugs, this is what most of you will have in mind. Guys that eat our foods, eat our crops, or worse even, drink our blood. Yet I'm going to tell you that these kind of creatures could be a solution to food security. If I talk about bugs, then these are other bugs, and quite often these are better liked than the previous ones. Butterflies, honeybees. We all know these days that honeybees are essential for our life on this planet. They're essential for plant reproduction, for the earth being green. So when we talk about these kind of insects, then usually the scene is much better. But I want to talk about this, how insects can feed us. And so how insects are not only good to produce new plants, how insects are not only good to remove dung, how insects are good for us. And in fact, insects in general, if I mention the word insects, entomology was used in the introduction, and well, then you know, insects usually are seen as problems. Well, in fact, insects are not. We know about 1 million species of insects. And out of these 1 million species of insects, about 0.5% is causing problems. Why? Because they eat our crops, they can eat our clothes, they can eat our houses, they can eat ourselves, but it's only 0.5%. Among these, there are species that really cause serious problems. Think of malaria mosquitoes that transmit malaria. The malaria mosquito itself is only a nuisance, but if it carries the malaria parasite, it can be deadly, and 600,000 people die every year. So that's a big problem. But out of the 1 million, the vast majority is not detrimental, but is beneficial to us. Without them, we would not be here at this room in Manchester. There's even accounts on how they contribute to economies. And there was a study done about 10 years ago, how they contribute to the economy of the United States. And the account was that it is about $57 billion per year contributed to the economy of the United States, all for free. In that same year, the United States contributed about $80 billion to engage in the war in Iraq. So about the same amount of money they got for free from insects. Now you might wonder, insects contributing to the economy, and not only to the United States, also to the UK or the Netherlands or any economy in the world. Why? Well, they have all kinds of basic functions that they give us for free. They remove dung. And in the left top corner, you see even a signpost that in South Africa is there to make sure that you give priority to dung beetles if you're in a car. Stop for dung beetles. Honeybees are essential for food production. 3/4 of plant species rely on honeybees and their kin for reproduction of plants. 1/3 of everything that you eat comes out of pollination, whether it's bananas, apples, oranges, tomatoes, a range of things. In nature, insects keep each other in check. There's hardly any pest problems caused by insects because they have their own predators that feed on them. And finally, insects are food for a range of organisms. If you are a birder, then, well, it's most likely that you would never see most of your songbirds that you like to watch without insects, because 90% of all songbirds are reliant on insects as food. And so insects are being eaten by birds, by small mammals, and the mammals are feeding, and the birds are being eaten by bigger animals, and it all ends up in the food chain, and finally it ends up in us. But it's a rather indirect way. We could also eat them ourselves. Who of you ever ate insects? Ah, very good. That's about almost half, I would say. So I'm not telling too much new. Do you do it on a daily basis? Or it was just once in a lifetime? Who does it a few times a year? Oh, that's fewer. Well, I think I still have news for the majority of you. Okay, but we're talking about food security here, and food security is to be seen in the context of, well, we have 7 billion people at the moment on this planet, and we're growing to about 9 billion, maybe 10 billion by 2050. That is a major challenge. We have to feed 2-3 more billion mouths in the next 40 years. But if that would be the only challenge, I'm sure we would be able to manage. But there's this challenge in combination with various other challenges. One of them is climate change. Climate is changing. We've now finally, everyone seems to kind of agree that climate really is changing. Even the most skeptical people in the United States do. But climate change means that there's a problem there. The red areas on this map are those areas where if we are doing business as usual, we'll have a reduction in production rather than an increase in production. So large parts of the world will have a reduction in production when we need an increase. So that's an extra challenge. And then we have a few more challenges. If we need to produce more food, then of course we can increase the amount of arable land on the planet. We can cut down the rainforests. But that's going to cause new problems in terms of biodiversity. Then we're growing crops not only to feed us or to feed others, but we're even raising crops now to feed our holy cows, the cars. And so there's more and more crops for biodiesel. That's going to compete with food production. And then there's food and health. We need to make sure that the food that we eat is also healthy. That's a set of challenges that altogether make that the challenge of only feeding the world in 2050 is much more than the single challenge. It's a combination of challenges, and we won't be able to get through that by just going on as usual. Now, in the Netherlands, we then say we need a solution, and we need for that a sheep with 5 legs. I don't think that's an English expression, but at least it's something where you need something that's extraordinary. And if you search for a sheep with 5 legs, you'll never find it unless it's crippled, because a sheep with 5 legs is usually not so viable. But I have a much better solution, and that's not a sheep with 5 legs, but it's an animal with 6 legs. Insects can provide one of the solutions to this food security issue that we're facing. In this part of the world, if you have a festive meal, it would look something like this. You would see a big chunk of meat, some vegetables, maybe some fruits, a few grains, but the meat would be the main portion. Now, if we look globally, and if we look only at calories, then there's about 1 billion people that on a daily basis have too few calories. They have a problem in calorie intake, 1 billion out of 7. At the other end of the spectrum, there's about 0.7 billion people that have too many calories intake, and they also have health problems. When we talk about food security, quite often the 1 billion on the left-hand side here is what we talk about. We think, okay, we have to increase calories. If this would be the only problem, that would be not so bad, because we might increase calories. But it's not the only problem, because in between this 1 and 0.7 billion, there's about 2 billion people that do have sufficient calories intake, but they lack sufficient nutritional resources, and especially because they lack sufficient animal proteins. Now, I'm not saying that we all need to have the animal intake proteins that we have here in this part of the world, but animal proteins, especially also because you get micronutrients, to some extent are needed in our diet, at least in certain phases of our life. But so there's 2 billion people that have sufficient calories, but they don't have sufficient animal proteins. So out of the 7 billion that we have at the moment, about half is having some kind of food or nutritional problems. Now, if you go out in the countryside and you see these vast agricultural lands, then you might say, well, what is he talking about? I see all this food being produced. If I go into the supermarkets, I don't see any problem. Let's focus here on this agricultural land. Of the global agricultural land, this is not what we are going to eat. We are only going to eat a proportion of this. And who of you thinks that we consume more than 50% of what we produce? Can you raise hands? No one thinks? Yeah? One. And who thinks that we consume less than 50% of this? That's the majority. I think there's still hands that didn't go up. Well, the latter group really is right. Of all agricultural land, 70% is devoted to producing livestock. Not because the livestock needs all this land, but because the livestock needs the feed in order to grow. Only 30% of all this is being used to feed us. Why is that? Well, if you feed a cow, then every 10 kilograms of feed result into 1 kilogram of cow. And of a cow, we consume about 40%. And so altogether, we need about 25 kilograms of feed for 1 kilogram of beef. That's quite a loss. 25 into 1. It's rather inefficient, I would say. And if we look at meat consumption, then we see that, for instance, in Europe, we consume on average about 80 kilograms of meat per person per year, everyone included. Infants, old people, everyone included, about 80 kilograms per person. In the US, it's even worse. They consume about 120 kilograms per person per year. And if you then consider that for every kilogram being eaten, there was 25 kilograms of feed needed, that contributes to the 70-30 distribution. There's large parts in the world where they eat much less. If you look at, for instance, China, it's at about 50 kilograms per year per person at this moment. 30 years ago, it was 50% of that, it was 25. And by 2050, the average Chinese will consume the same amount that we eat today. So it has quadrupled in about 60 years. If 1.3 billion people are going to double their meat consumption in the next 40 years, that's going to make a big contribution in meat consumption. So we're consuming a lot of meat. And in fact, to be honest, in this part of the world, we're eating too much meat. We could easily do with about a fourth of what we're eating now. But so far, when I gave this talk, individuals might say, I'm willing to reduce, but overall, I don't see any reduction in meat consumption, even when the number of vegetarians increases. Now, the world population increases exponentially. But because the world population, on average, is still getting wealthier, and take the Chinese, if they are going to double their meat consumption in the next 30, 40 years, then it means that we need more meat, because everyone that gets wealthier is going to eat more meat. That means that if the food consumption in 2000 was set at 100%, then what we need in 2050 is more than the increase in the number of people. We need an extra increase in food production in addition to the number of people that we get. And the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, predicted that by 2050 we need about 70% more food than we used in 2000. 70% more. Whereas we already use about 70% of all agricultural land for meat production. In the same way, it will be not possible. We need alternatives. In fact, what we can see from this is that we're going to face an animal protein crisis. Food security is not so much a calorie problem, but it's especially an animal protein crisis. And that's because of this 70-30 distribution. Because we are so inefficient in meat production and we're so addicted to meat that we eat 80 to even 120 kilograms per person per day, and the countries where it's less are increasing up to the standards that we have already in this part of the world. Can we say to other parts of the world, well, don't do it, stay at 50? That would be ridiculous. We might say, well, let's go down, but even that would be ridiculous. Well, that would be good, but that would not be the major contribution because the total population of Europe is much less than the total population of China. Overall, the main problem here is that we have a limitation in agricultural land on this planet, and we just have only this one planet. So there's alternatives, and that's what I want to talk about today. A couple of years ago, the Wall Street Journal asked us to write about this. We were talking about insects as potential animal protein source for already a while. When the Wall Street Journal asked us to write an article for them, initially I thought, can't be true. Pinched myself in the arm. Yes, really, they wanted to have an article on that. That meant that at least also in that area, people were taking this serious. And I put in the top line here that the basic reason for that is that insects are much, much better in converting feed into meat. Where a cow needs 25 kilograms for every kilogram of beef, for 1 kilogram of insect meat, you need only 2.2 kilograms. Insects are about 10 times more efficient than cows are. If you would be an entrepreneur and you would have two incomes, two streams of sources for the same output, and you would say, well, one is 10 times more efficient than the other, I'm pretty sure that almost every entrepreneur would say, I'll take the more efficient one. But we have not done that yet. One of the first responses I usually get is, well, but humans were not made to eat insects. We are made to eat meat. And in the old days, when we were still on the steppes, collecting meat, hunting, we were going for the meat and not for insects. Well, that's not true. All in our evolutionary history, we have been eating insects, and our ancestors did as well. Monkeys, primates, the hominoids, and even Homo sapiens is eating insects. At this moment, about 2 billion people on this planet are eating insects. 2 out of 7 billion are eating insects on a regular basis. Not once in a lifetime, but on a regular basis. Not because they're hungry, because they love it. And in fact, we can learn a lot from these people. Only in Europe and North America, so far it has been much lower. But I'm pretty optimistic that this is going to change. So let me tell you a bit more on insects and how they can provide us with food sources. I told you in the beginning that out of the 1 million species that we know, there's only a vast minority that causes problems. But in fact, we haven't even explored the total diversity because we estimate that there's about 6 million species on this planet. We go to the moon, we go to Mars, we go to space. We don't even know all the biodiversity on our own planet. About 5 million species still to be discovered. Here you see me in a small provincial town in China where I eat a wonderful dish. And the dish consists of vegetables, peanuts, caterpillars, bee larvae, wasp larvae. It was a wonderful dish, and if that was a restaurant here in Manchester, that would be the place where I would have lunch today. Overall, there's knowledge about 2,000 insect species being eaten on this planet. 2,000 insect species. The vast majority, much more than the about 20 species of vertebrates that we eat, including pigs, chicken, fish, cows, etc. So a very diverse source. They're being eaten because they're a delicacy. And delicacies sometimes are a bit weird. We have our own weird delicacies. Who of you likes oysters? A minority. Who of you like this? Yeah, a bit more. especially when there's a good garlic sauce, they're excellent. This must have a larger number. Who likes this? And if you like this, then it's only a tiny step towards the new delicacy, which is this. Because there's hardly any difference between a shrimp and a locust. In fact, in some countries they call locusts the sky shrimps. If you take away the wings and the legs, and if you take away the legs of the shrimp, they're almost the same. And even taxonomically, they're very, very similar. But for those of you who did not raise their hand when I asked you the question, who of you eats insects? There's news. There's always news in these kind of meetings. You all eat insects. And then my first response is, answer that I get is usually, when I'm on the bike and I have my mouth open. No. When you're eating, I don't need to ask who loves chocolate because I expect all hands to go up. Anyone that does not like chocolate? No, I don't see any hands. Peanut butter, ketchup, apple juice, orange juice, any pre-processed food has some insects in it. And if you're eating pre-processed foods, you will eat about up to 500 grams per year. Why? Well, let's take the example of the ketchup. Suppose you would make ketchup yourself. You would go to the grocery store, buy tomatoes, like this, and make your ketchup. But in a ketchup production, they also get the tomatoes, and they try to select the tomatoes for this, but they can't check them all very well. And sometimes there's a tomato that looks like this. If they see it, they'll remove it, but they won't see all of them. And in fact, regulations say that in ketchup, in chocolate, in anything, there's a certain limit of animal pieces, insect pieces that can be present. And if you're under that limit, you can sell it. And so in anything that we eat, there's something under this limit. And if you add that all up, you come to about 500 grams per person per year. In fact, the ketchup is fortified with extra proteins. They should use that to promote ketchup. Chocolate, the same thing. I'm waiting for the day that that's going to be done. But then you might say, well, this is by accident. Well, not only by accident. In your goodie bag, you have something that has something of insects on purpose. It says on the bag that there's pseudo entomology. It is something that is similar to what you have here. These cookies or the sweets, the M&Ms, or surimi sticks. Surimi sticks, a good example. It's white fish, but if you dye it with this cochineal, the red dye, you can sell it as imitation crab meat. It increases the price. Cochineal is nothing more than an extract made of insects. Here you see a lady in Peru harvesting these insects that you see in the left bottom. Harvesting these insects, the scale insects, they're dried, extracted. That provides a wonderful red color that has been used to dye fabrics already for centuries. It has been used to dye our food for a long time. Usually on the food labels it either says cochineal or it will say E120. And on the bag with the sweets in your bag, it says E120. It's not something artificial, it's a natural color coming from these insects. If you go to the grocery store, at least 100 products you will find there have E120 in it. And for those of you who use lipstick, pay attention next time. Most likely if you use the red lipstick, it has E120 in it as well. So, what are the advantages of eating insects? Well, the first thing is quality. Quality is the same for insect meat and for a beef steak. It might be even better. In terms of protein, it's as good. It has the same amount of proteins. It has usually a bit less fat. And in the fats that there are, there's more polyunsaturated fatty acids, so the good fatty acids. And it has a higher level of micronutrients, like iron or zinc. If you suffer from anemia, it's better to eat insects than to eat a steak. So for the quality, it's similar or even better. For health reasons, we all know about food scandals and that there's BSE or there's swine flu. Insects are so different, they also have their diseases, but the diseases are so different from the diseases that we carry that there's no recombination possible. When we had swine flu in the Netherlands about 15 years ago, the viruses that caused the swine flu and the viruses that cause human flu recombined, making a new virus that killed people. That would not be possible with insects. In fact, pigs are so similar to us that when we have a heart problem, we can get parts of a pig heart to repair our heart. Well, that would never be possible with an insect. Insects are so different, we can't take over their diseases. Then the third advantage is the feed conversion. I already explained that. 10 times better feed conversion. And if there's such a more efficient incorporation of feed into the animal, it means that there's not a lot of waste. And what's the waste? Well, usually the waste is this. And waste in terms of manure has two benefits. Insects produce less manure, but per kilogram of manure, they produce way less greenhouse gases than cows do or pigs do. So also for the environment and for climate change, insects are much better than using cows or pigs. So that's 4 points for insects. Why don't we do it yet? Well, I even have a fifth point. Suppose you're growing tomatoes, and after the harvest, you take the tomatoes, then you're left with this plant. There's a range of insect species that would love to eat this plant. And so you could use the plant waste, feed it to insects, and then finally recombine that on your plate, and then have the tomatoes together with the insects. Much better solution than to throw it away. So, cows compared to insects have a much bigger ecological footprint. Insects have a low ecological footprint. I'll show you that in a few scientific results from our lab in Wageningen. If you look at the energy needed to produce insects per kilogram of edible protein, well, in energy use, they're not so good. They're about the same as the production of milk, pork, chicken, and beef, where the blue bars are the lower values and the red bars are the higher values reproduced in the literature. So they're not so good, because in our part of the world, you need to warm up the insects. You need heating. If you would produce them in the tropics, this would be reduced, and then insects would be much better than producing cows, simply because they're cold-blooded. In terms of global warming potential, they're way better. Compare the green bar, which is so low, compared to the blue and the red bar for cows. In terms of greenhouse gas production, insects are the way to go. In terms of land use, again, they're much lower. The green bar is much lower than any of the other animal protein sources that we have. And so overall, the land availability was the major issue that we had. So land availability is going to be helped when we're switching from cows to insects. And so insects in this sense could be a major solution to the problems that we're facing in feeding the world by 2050. Well, insects are consumed in large portions of the world. This map shows knowledge that we have about the number of insect species being eaten in different parts of the world. And it's not easy to get that knowledge, because if you go to people and ask whether they eat insects, in many cases, if a white person comes there, they will say, no, we don't eat insects. Because they know what they get as response. When they say, oh yes, we love them, they will say, well, come on, change. It's dumb, don't do it. That has been a response for a long time. We have been exporting the McDonald's philosophy instead of importing the durable, the sustainable production and consumption habits that they had in other parts of the world. In Mexico, it's rather dark-colored because there's a scientist there who is well informed and has reported on more than 300 species of insects being eaten in Mexico. This is our current state of knowledge, but I'm pretty sure that there's much more to be learned from this. So 2 billion people already eat insects. And if you take a closer look, the difference between a shrimp and a locust is hardly anything. There's a large variation. If we take the regular meats and fish, then, well, within 2 weeks you would have had a different thing every day. With insects you can go on for years, because there's 2,000 different species. So it has many advantages. So why have we not included that yet as a major item in our food chain in Europe? Well, for one thing, that's a matter of perception. Insects have usually been seen as something icky, something that we needed to get away with. So we need to really educate people, and we need to do a lot of research. And that's what we're doing in the Netherlands, and we see that it's taking off. But the origin of that in the Western world was here in the UK. In 1885, Vincent Holt wrote this little book called Why Not Eat Insects? And in this book he says, well, I'm a farmer and I grow my potato plants, and when I have these potato plants, they're being eaten by insects. What should we do? We can kill them, but that's a waste. Why not eat them when they eat our crops? Well, that message was way ahead of its time, but it's very relevant in these days. In 1997, my colleague in Wageningen, Arnold van Huis, took up this idea, and he was a tropical entomologist. He had been in the tropics for large amounts of time, and he had found out finally that insects are really eaten there. And he started to promote it in the Netherlands. In 2006, we had a big festival in Wageningen town. Wageningen has only 35,000 inhabitants. More than 20,000 people came. There was a big issue on insects as food there. It was broadcasted in more than 40 countries over the world. As a result of that festival, some companies that were producing insects as pet food came to us and said, well, we really think that this is the future. Can you help us in getting this also done for human consumption? And so together we went to the Ministry of Agriculture, and initially the Minister of Agriculture said, well, you can come with questions on cows, on pigs, on fish, on chicken, but insects, we want to get rid of those. It took us some time, but finally now at the Ministry of Agriculture, they also know that insects can be used as food. Now these companies are producing insects for human consumption, and they're on the market in the Netherlands. You can buy them over the internet and in different stores. In 2010, the Netherlands were the chair of the European Union. Our Minister of Agriculture in those days took all her colleagues when they visited the Netherlands to a chic restaurant, and there all together they ate insects, a major contribution. And at the same time, she provided us with 1 million euros for doing research, which among my colleagues, who were also skeptics, resulted in the response, oh, you get money for research? So it's not something hypothetical, it's something real. As soon as euros are connected, it's something real. I don't know why. In TED Global, I was able to give a talk, and then we produced an Insect Cookbook to convey the message to the people. This cookbook has all kinds of recipes, but here I would like to show you one. This is the most famous chocolate maker in the Netherlands. What kind of nice things you can make of them. This is with mealworms and locusts. So in this book, we have recipes, we have background information, we have interviews with people, and it all gives a view on how insects are being used and how you can use it in your own kitchen. So it's really a book like do this at home. Recipes, and here you see a pumpkin soup with mealworms on the cream here. So really visible. Here, the locusts are covered up, so you don't really see them. And then there's a range of other recipes. Some of them you really see the insects, and others you don't see them at all, depending on what you want to prepare. With this book, we were happy enough to have the first copy being presented to the Queen of the Netherlands, Queen Maxima. And afterwards, we've learned that the book didn't end up in the attic, but it's actually being used in the royal palace. We went with the book to Kofi Annan. And with Kofi Annan, we discussed the issues of food security. And Kofi Annan said, well, in order to feed the world, we really need alternatives. And so he was very supportive of this. And he said, the most important thing is that we educate people. We need to educate people. We produced an English version of the book, and the interview with Kofi Annan is in the English version of the cookbook. So here's the English version of the cookbook. It's also available in the bookstall outside of the room here. And if you buy it, I'll be happy to autograph it. It has interviews with Kofi Annan, an interview with René Redzepi, the chef of the best restaurant in the world, elected 4 times out of in the 5 last years. And he is using insects in his recipes because he says the taste is wonderful. I can't do some of the flavors with any other ingredients. So it's not because he has to, but because it really is so nice. Well, we've been telling this story in the Netherlands for quite a while now. And I really see that it's changing the perception in the Netherlands. In 2006, so that was at this time when we had this festival, to a City of Insects, there was a web poll, and 6% said, well, yes, I definitely want to eat insects. 24 said, well, maybe. And 70 said, no, not at all. I didn't find that too bad, because it was 30% in a positive sense. In 2013, the same question was being asked, and now it was 70% positive and 30% negative. So it has changed, and I see this in other polls coming up as well. There's also been a poll in the UK last year, and pretty good. 40% out of 2,000 Brits being interviewed said that they were willing to eat insects. I really see that time is changing, and also here in the audience at the beginning there were quite some people that already ate insects. In the Netherlands, we now have entrepreneurs that really produce insects for human consumption. And not only for human consumption, but also for animal feed. And here you see the production in terms of protein on the left and fats in the bottom that are going into the animal feed chain. Not only in the Netherlands, but also in South Africa and the United States. So there's big changes occurring at the moment. And for animal feed, there's various markets. There's aquaculture, so fish production, zoos, but also chicken and pets can be raised on insects. And if you ask a chicken whether it wants to feed on the regular chicken feed or on mealworms, the chicken will tell you that they want to feed on the mealworms rather than the chicken feed. Yeah, good. So, in 2014 we produced the cookbook. In 2014 we also had the international meeting together with the FAO in the Netherlands, where everyone involved in this topic gathered. 450 people out of 45 countries gathered, making plans for the new developments. There were more developments than even I had seen from a distance. And then in the Netherlands, there was a supermarket chain that by November took it on the shelves, and now all 600 shops of the supermarket chain are carrying insects. You can buy insect burgers, you can buy insects as themselves. So a major step to really get it going in the Netherlands. But not only in the Netherlands, internationally, there's a range of products now on the market. There's all kinds of protein bars, like you see the Chapool bars or the Exo bars. There's in Britain, Ento producing insects. In Belgium, they produce insect burgers. There's a range of products now on the market that you can buy if you want to taste it. And so we even have more support. You should eat crickets. And you can do it now. Who of you would be willing to eat insects today? Oh, here go the hens. Well, open the doors. You'll be served in a minute. And I'm pretty sure that in 10 years from now, in 2025, we'll look back to 2015 and we'll say, why did we not eat insects back in 2015? And here they come. Enjoy.